Recently, game journalists have gotten a reputation of just being all around bad. Now, me personally, I do think that a lot of it has been earned, especially with the whole Gamergate stuff and the ridiculous articles that have been coming out ever since. But it seemed to be dying down a little bit. That was until an article came out about Spider-Man Remastered PC, which came out yesterday officially, and most people were positive about it, but this article writer decided that it wasn't a good thing because it was too positive about cops. Now I'm going to read a little bit of the article and talk about it. I want to give a shout out to Mischief for even making a video about this, or I would not have seen it at all. I thought this was really interesting and figured it was something that warranted a video because it's just so ridiculous that this type of stuff keeps happening in game journalism, and it's the reason why channels like Mischief and Bellular News and all types of people and YouTubers in general that talk about the news are put in such high regard, especially in regards to how game journalists are held. Hopefully that'll make the game journalists think about the implications of what they do, but I doubt it because the people telling them that, hey, people don't want to hear this type of stuff. They just want to hear your thoughts on the game and not its outside implications. They just don't want to hear that. And there's nothing wrong with giving your opinions on stuff, but when they're this bad, it just makes you think, oh, just review the game, dude. Just review the game. All right. So the excerpt I'm going to read to you is from a quote from another article, but it's quoted in the article, and both before and after the quote, he pretty much says that he agrees with it, and the same type of things get carried on throughout the rest of the game. So let's get into it. Spider-Man doesn't just help the cops by catching armed robbers and putting deranged supervillains in jail. He helps them maintain a high-tech, citywide surveillance network. This is a game mechanic that will be familiar to anyone who has played an open-world RPG in the last decade. What the towers functionally do is reveal areas of the game map to players so that they can find additional missions and collectibles. So, at this point of the quote, it just seems innocuous, like this is something that's in every game. Assassin's Creed especially is known for all their markers and stuff. Most open-world games that are made by Western developers have a ton of different markers all through the map, and that's just the way they're made, and they all have different justifications. Like in the first Assassin's Creed game, a lot of the objectives are viewpoints so that you can map out the area that you're at, and then once you map out the area, there's more markers for investigations that you can do. Things like that. But it isn't strictly a game mechanic, it's also a narrative choice. One that comes with some pretty obvious real-life parallels. The NYPD buying cutting-edge equipment and software from a shady tech company owned by a billionaire with maniacal tendencies. I don't know why I said maniacal. So that it can monitor and collect data on citizens is a dystopian yet sensible video game plot point. It also something that literally happened in the real New York City. I don't know who this person is. I think their name was Thomas Lay. Anyway, the real life parallels, I would guess, would be like the Patriot Act and like the panic in New York after 9/11. Like that's the only thing I could think of. And a shady tech company owned by a billionaire with maniacal tendencies. Like you know who she's talking about, like in the game, but who is she talking about in real life? It's really weird how people will just see something and just interpret it when the creator just didn't intend it that way. Like, a lot of times I think about, honestly, every time I take any type of English test, I think about this. This is a quick story. Author who took a reading comprehension quiz on her own book, and she failed the quiz completely because she was like, the blue book doesn't mean anything. It's just the blue book. And I feel like a lot of times people work so hard to derive meaning out of things that just don't matter because they're just like, oh, we have to find something here. Like, oh, this Spider-Man game is pro-cop propaganda, not co-crop or whatever I just said. Jeez. I mean, there's even points in the game where Spider-Man fights corrupt cops. Like, I wonder if he just decided, like, oh, I'm going to leave out all the parts that don't contribute to my argument, and I'm just going to be super vague because I just think that's the best thing for me. Like, it's really weird. I always try to, like, when I'm responding to somebody, make an argument and try to think of arguments that are going against my argument. And if you can think of a good enough argument that goes against your argument, then your argument's wrong, more than likely. So he talks a little bit more about how Spider-Man is working with the police to set up a surveillance state, with how he's helping out the police and how it's being presented in the game as a useful resource. And then we come to this part. Spider-Man isn't a do-gooder kid from Queens helping out his community so much as a willing tool of the state. This was weird in 2018, and critics pointed it out at the time. Then 4 more years went by with even more public scrutiny and criticism of police forces in America. In 2022, Marvel Spider-Man feels even more out of touch than any real version of an American city. It's weird how he just said that, like, oh, this stuff is exactly how it is in real life in New York. Oh, but now it's not a representation of an actual American city. So there's only 2 things that can really be happening here. Either it's complete cognitive dissonance, and this is only 2 paragraphs apart here that I'm reading. You can look at the article because I'm going to link it in the description. I don't understand how you could write this, read it, and then be like, oh yeah, that's fine, that makes sense. Unless this person somehow does not know that New York City is an American city, which is not possible. I'm not going to accept that. So there's clear and obvious dissonance here, right? Which every person has. I'm sure I'm cognitively dissonant about something. I can't think of it right now, but I'm sure if I thought for like maybe like a minute or two, I'd be like, oh, I say that you shouldn't eat peanut butter and I eat it all the time, or something like that. Well, that's more hypocrisy. Or like, I think that children shouldn't eat peanut butter, but I let my children eat peanut butter, something like that. Like, I'm sure it exists, but this is an article that you have to proofread before you send it in, or somebody is proofreading this. Did they not point it out? Weird. And how is he a willing tool of the state? I mean, you're framing the state as a bad thing by saying that, right? So, and the rest of the way that this article is worded. So, why is he fighting the corrupt cops? Why isn't he corrupt himself in what he does? Why doesn't he use his abilities for money at all? That's weird. You would think if he was like a malicious person or was a tool of a malicious entity, that's what he would do, because that's what malicious entities and malicious people would do. Kind of odd. Just because he's helping out the cops doesn't mean that he's a tool of them. They're really reaching out for his help. Is Batman in the Dark Knight a tool for the state because he works with the cops? I guess he's not, because he beats the Joker and that's illegal, right? I don't know. Though its crisp new coat of paint is an undeniable upgrade, Marvel's Spider-Man can't help but show its age. It reminds me of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, cute, funny, and ultimately propagating a series of uncomfortable lies about the NYPD. That's why, as I play, I spend so much time on my Steam Deck doing chores around the city, rather than advancing the main story. I've been visiting every single one of Harry Osborn's research stations, which give Peter the chance to use both his superpowers and his scientific knowledge to clean up chemical spills and right environmental wrongs. So I haven't seen all of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but I have seen a little bit of it. And it's interesting that he says something like that about the show, that like has moments where they'll like criticize like parts of the NYPD and like workplace culture in general. Like, think about the Vulture in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Like, he is so clearly sexist, and he's someone you're not supposed to like. I don't understand. Like, there's even an episode where I think Amy talks about how she was harassed by her supervisor, and that's why she transferred over to the division she worked in at the time of the show. And when it comes to just doing chores around the city instead of advancing the main story, I feel like it's a silly idea to rob yourself of an experience just because you don't like one aspect of it. Like, I read the Berserk manga, and I really don't like the little elf that is always with guts. I think he's annoying. Does that stop me from finishing the series? No, even though I'm like only like 100 or so chapters in, I can look past that because it's a great experience and it's a great story. This is a game that is a great experience and an alright story. I feel like you should give it a shot and just ignore this minor plot point that really isn't that big of a deal. So for the next little excerpt, he says, the side quests don't advance the plot. They don't give me any story or character development because that's not what they're meant to do. And then he says, they do offer a glimpse into what could have been. A version of Spider-Man who helps out when and where he can, not using the power of a massive surveillance state, but rather his own eyes, ears, wits, and web shooters. It's a lot easier to maintain the illusion on the Steam Deck, only halfway paying attention to the plot as I swing through Central Park and rescue a homeless man's pet pigeons. Spider-Man should stay small. He's a friendly neighborhood type after all. What if there's a threat across the city? Let's say I don't know how the layout of New York is. Let's say he's in the Bronx and Rhino is running around Manhattan. I guess those are far apart. Doesn't really matter. It's just a metaphor. And he's just chilling in his house. He's not going to be like, oh, I hear the Rhino all the way a borough over. Like, that doesn't make any sense. What? He could have something that could help him out to an immense degree, and he should just give it up because you don't want to see it in the game. That doesn't make sense. Now, I'm not advocating for, oh, we should be watched at all times, and anyone who's a threat of a crime should be locked up. No, I'm not saying that, and I'm not advocating for a surveillance state. I'm just saying it makes sense for Spider-Man to be able to monitor as much as he can, to help out as much as he can. That's just what makes the most sense. All in all, I disagree a lot with the article, but I don't think this person's a bad person. I just think that they just got it really, really wrong here. And unfortunately, game journalism is just not what it used to be. I remember as a kid, I would be so excited to get those Game Informer magazines. I would love them. I would just flip through them and read the little columns of the reviews and being like, oh, that sounds like a cool, neat little game. I'd like to play that. And it's just gone now. I remember 2-3 years ago, my dad handed me one and was like, do you want to read this? And I was like, sure, all right. And it just had lost its luster to me. It just was not the same. And obviously, some of that's probably nostalgia. It probably wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, or as I thought it was even back then. But it felt like it really has lost something. Like, I feel like anything can be an art if you make it into one. And this was something that could have been an art and was just failed dramatically. And I'm talking about the genre as a whole, not just this article, even though I think this article got it wrong. And I will say that over and over again. But, I mean, what can you really do? Just support your YouTubers that are actually doing it right and hope that game journalists will change their tune, because I miss good gaming journalism and I think it can improve. So I'm going to leave it off here. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it so much. Goodbye.